Hey, welcome everyone to tonight's Clean Water Forum. My name is Michaelin, and I'm one of our four-person team representing Food and Water Watch Iowa here tonight. We also have my colleague Jennifer Breon, who is based out in Iowa City, and this summer we have two interns working with our team, Adam Bessman in Des Moines and Evelyn Burgess out in Iowa City. So tonight is actually our sixth Clean Water Forum that we've organized here in the state of Iowa, and it's the first time we're doing one of these forums online. For those of you joining as participants, there's a question and answer box at the bottom of your screen where you can submit questions to Food and Water Watch and our guest speakers tonight. Throughout the duration of the program, we'll be doing our best to answer these questions. And you can always follow up with us after this event if you have other ideas or thoughts come to you. You can go ahead to the next slide, Evelyn. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Food and Water Watch, we are a national grassroots organization that mobilizes people to fight for a fair and livable future. And to start this call, we wanted to bring our motto, Fight Like You Live Here, into the conversation to make it really clear that we brought all of you here together. We are launching clean water canvases and clean water forums here in Iowa to empower Iowans to fight back against the water crisis that's being fueled by corporate agriculture. We know that throughout history, as people have confronted impacts like what we're seeing here in Iowa, and fought back, they have radically transformed their society and won solutions that people needed. I know many people here in Iowa facing the cancer crisis and the water crisis are feeling a lot of despair and living with a weight of fear over our heads. But Food and Water Watch and dozens of allies across the state are bringing people together to fight back and to end the system that is harming all of us. So our agenda for tonight, we'll go over a little review of what's happening with our water here in the state of Iowa. Then Adam will share a little bit about recent work that we've done. Then we'll pass it to a few guest speakers, including Dr. Sandra Steingraber, Carolyn Raffensperger, and Dr. Adam Shriver, before closing out with some next steps. And with that, I will pass it to Jennifer.
Thanks, Michaelin. Well, I know that we have some new folks on this call, and I know we have many of our Food and Water Watch activists who are all too familiar, unfortunately, with the water crisis that we have in Iowa. So this has been making headlines across the state, but mainly in Des Moines all summer. And Adam is going to talk a little bit more in a moment about some actions they've done there. But in a nutshell, this is the problem. We have in Iowa more factory farms than any other state. And those factory farms produce 108 billion pounds of manure every year. That's 25 times as much as Iowa's human population. And that waste is largely unregulated and untreated. So that system is dependent upon all the cropland in Iowa, the corn and soybeans. More than 90% of the land in Iowa is privately owned and used for agricultural production. And Iowa's farmers spread more pesticide, commercial fertilizer, and manure than any other state. So the nitrate pollution that we're seeing in the Des Moines River, and honestly, we're seeing record levels of nitrates in rivers around the state of Iowa this summer, is coming from agriculture, and specifically this factory farm industrial agriculture system that is highly dependent upon confinement operations, a huge concentration of animals. We have over 25 million hogs in Iowa, and row cropping. And so corn in particular is dependent on nitrate fertilizer, whether that's synthetic nitrogen or the spreading of manure. And then we have on all that cropland around the state a tiling system so that when the fertilizer and manure is spread on the fields from the confinements, it runs straight into our rivers and streams. And so it's causing problems not only with drinking water around this state. We see this in Des Moines, where the lawn watering ban is in effect, but also in smaller towns that don't have the resources to deal with that, and for rural folks that are um, getting their drinking water from private wells. This is a real public health crisis. So we also know that nitrate is linked to cancer. And if we could move to the next slide. Um, so the cancer nitrate is linked with colon cancer and several other types of cancer. There's new research just this summer that links nitrate in drinking water to birth defects as well as premature births and low birth weights. So that was a new study that just recently came out. Of course, many of you know that Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the country and the fastest growing cancer rate in the country. And um, so this is a real public health concern. There are a lot of solutions out there. Iowa has had a voluntary nutrient reduction plan in place for over a decade now that has failed, frankly, because it relies on farmers to adopt conservation practices voluntarily, and that has not happened at a scale to counteract just that volume of industrial agriculture and factory farming that we have in this state. So when we're talking about solutions and what Food and Water Watch does to fight this crisis and to do something about it, we need regulations in place that stop the pollution of nitrogen and pesticide and fertilizer at the source. And so Food and Water Watch has worked for the past couple of years on something we call the Clean Water for Iowa Act, which is legislation at the state level that would require medium and large scale um, CAFOs or confined animal feeding operations. That's the technical term for factory farms to get a discharge permit under the Clean Water Act. And so that would set limits on what they can discharge into the environment, and it would hold them responsible if there are spills or messes that contribute to fish kills or other spills in our waterways. So we are advocating for that legislation. It is one of the very few bills in the Iowa legislature that would actually address this problem at the source of the pollution. Any kind of conservation measure, it can reduce the nitrogen going into the waterways, but it's not going to have the same effect as stopping the pollution in the first place. And so in the past, we've advocated for a moratorium on the building and expansion of factory farms in Iowa. Ultimately, we're going to have to reduce that volume and shift to a different system. So we would advocate for actually banning factory farms. This is kind of what we can do in the meantime to address that. The other source of nitrate pollution is the actual synthetic nitrogen fertilizer that farmers apply to the fields, and we need to also have legislation that limits the use of that. So I'm going to pass it to Adam Bestman, who's our intern in Des Moines, to talk a little bit more about um, the lawn watering ban in Des Moines and what's happened this summer. So
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer uh, touched on in that last section, and as I'm sure many of you both know and have experienced, we are dealing with a historic water crisis in Iowa right now, specifically in central Iowa. For nearly 2 months, Central Iowa Water Works has put in place an unprecedented restriction on water usage because their facilities are so overwhelmed with the sheer amount of nitrate pollution that they need to filter out to keep our water sources safe. In June, rivers all across the state were found to contain nitrate levels that exceed the legal limit set by the EPA, which is 10 milligrams per liter. In western Iowa, the Floyd River tested at 15 milligrams per liter, and the Cedar River in Cedar Rapids tested at 12 milligrams per liter. Meanwhile, in central Iowa, the Raccoon River tested at 20 milligrams per liter, which is double the required limit for drinking water to be considered safe. And it's also a record high that we have not seen since 2013 in this area. To further put these numbers into perspective, there have been multiple studies that have been published that show that nitrate levels, even as low as 5 milligrams per liter, which is half of that legal limit that the EPA has set, can be linked to higher risks of certain types of cancer in people who are exposed to that pollution in their drinking water. As some of you may have heard, a recently published report commissioned by Polk County officials shows that 80% of nitrate contamination in our water is directly tied to agricultural practices. I believe Dr. Shriver, the other Adam, will be talking more about that later on. While this is a new figure, we and scientists have known for a long time now that practices employed by corporate agriculture plays an enormous, enormous role in environmental pollution and its associated health risks. Our politicians have also known this, only instead of prioritizing the well-being and safety of Iowans, they have effectively ignored this issue in favor of lining the pockets of their corporate donors in big ag. We believe that it is the job of our elected officials to serve in the interests of their constituents, and the prioritization of profit over people happening in our state government right now is unacceptable. For these reasons, earlier this month, our Des Moines team decided to stage a direct action targeting one of the biggest perpetrators of this behavior, our Governor Kim Reynolds. If you could go to there we go. So Reynolds consistently deflects questions about rising cancer rates and the water crisis. And in order to avoid facing her constituents and their opinions, she rarely makes public appearances, and she's really inaccessible. Because of this, when we heard that she would be speaking at the groundbreaking event for the new Italian American Cultural Center, and that her presence would be accompanied by multiple prominent state news outlets, we knew that we really had to seize this opportunity. So earlier this month, our Des Moines organizing team and 6 volunteers showed up outside the groundbreaking with signs and demanded that Reynolds address the water crisis and the agricultural pollution that's been causing it. We got a lot of great media attention on our issue from outlets like the Des Moines Register, the Gazette, KCCI, and I believe that's the Capital Dispatch that's on the slide right now. Because we were there protesting, the press that was already there asked Reynolds directly about nitrate pollution at the hands of Big Ag, and she was forced to give a response right there. This tactic is called media jacking, and it's defined by the organization Beautiful Trouble as, quote, hijacking your opponent's media event in a way that creatively reframes the issue while using their media presence to draw attention to your side of the story. This is just like one of the many ways that Food and Water Watch employs direct action in order to hold our politicians accountable and demand change. To speak a little bit more about direct action, we've invited one of our volunteers who attended this protest, Dallas Mules, to tell us about what motivated him to come out and what it was like to take action there. So Dallas, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Alrighty, thank you. Let me see here. I don't think my camera's working, but I will just talk. I heard about the protest that was going to go down there, and I decided I would stop by. What really helped motivate me to get going and go to the protest was hearing about just the overall state of our water here in Iowa. And it was really shocking to me because I had heard so many things about how good our water was, and all throughout my life growing up, I heard about how good our water was, and it really shocked me to hear that our water was being contaminated by people who should know better and should be better. And it concerns me. Just knowing that our politicians don't really care, and the people that we've entrusted to take care of our public safety has just been bought out by, as Adam said, by the big ag donors. It's very scary, very, very scary for me, and that's the main reason why I came out, and just to show up and be in support of our good friends at the Food and Water Watch. It's important that we do stuff like this to let our politicians know that they are still beholden to us, the people, and that they cannot shirk their responsibilities to us. And I feel like we got that point across to Governor Reynolds when she was forced to answer that question. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for sharing, Dallas. We absolutely love getting our volunteers more involved in any way that we possibly can. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I will pass it back to Jennifer to introduce our first kind of featured guest speaker.
Thanks, Adam. That was a great action that you guys did in Des Moines. So thanks to everyone who came out, and it was truly inspiring to see you guys out there. We are very excited and grateful tonight to have two special guests with us, Dr. Sandra Steingraber, who many of you know and have read her books, and then Carolyn Raffensperger, who many of you also know as a veteran of many environmental fights here in the state of Iowa. Carolyn is the executive director of the Science and Environmental Health Network. She's an environmental lawyer. She has worked with Sierra Club and other groups, and she is an expert on the precautionary principle. So, Carolyn, I will pass it over to you. And thank you so much for being here.
If you could take the slide down, partly because my name is misspelled on that. That I joke is my FBI alias, Raffensperger. It's a P instead of a B. If you could take the slide down so that I'm full screen, that would be great. Thank you. So Iowa is actually defined by water. If you read our Constitution, it describes in the very first paragraph after the preamble the rivers that set up the boundaries of Iowa. So it's the Mississippi, the Des Moines, the Missouri, and the Big Sioux that are mentioned at the very fore of the Constitution. I would submit to you that water defines Iowa as much as the tallgrass prairie, the prairie potholes, the stunning ecosystems that actually define our state. But it's rivers that are named in the Constitution. So, I think about water, and I made it as my background so that we would have water as a presence. Water is essential for life. Water is life. When I was at Standing Rock as a lawyer, defending the water, defending the land, defending future generations, all I could think of was that the river, the water, has its own voice. And so I want to represent that voice tonight here with my dear colleague and friend, Sandra Steingraber. We haven't mentioned cancer very much other than as a statistic. We have a lot of cancer. We haven't mentioned the birth defects and all of the health impacts of the pollution of our water. And, you know, I don't think of those as statistics. I think of every single person who has cancer. And on this call, if you can bring to mind a person that you know and that you love that has cancer, I'm sure you know someone. My own husband is in hospice right now, dying of cancer, probably caused by agricultural chemicals. And so he's not just a statistic. Neither is the person that you're thinking about. Every single person that adds up to another statistic, another number in our database as having cancer or a birth defect that is in some way linked to agricultural or other chemicals. But tonight we're really focused on the horrible, horrible problems associated with pesticides, fertilizers, manure, the agricultural industrial complex. And when you think of that, what we are creating is an index of suffering. Every single person, every single number, when you hear, a rate of whatever the rates are of cancer, that is a measure of suffering. It is an index of suffering. And I would submit to you that we probably need to create one, and we need to call it that. We need to call it suffering. When you saw on that slide that I'm an advocate and of the precautionary principle, the precautionary principle stands for the proposition that in the face of scientific uncertainty and the likelihood of harm, we take precautionary action to prevent that harm, to prevent suffering. And every time that Reynolds or anyone else avoids taking action to prevent a cancer or a birth defect, further pollution of our rivers, it says that they do not care about the suffering of people. So when I said that my husband's in hospice, a good friend of mine, Mark Edwards, some of you may know him, has said that we are now in hospice ecology in Iowa, that Iowa is dying. And one of the things I know from hospice, it's not likely with my husband, but with other people, they can get well enough to be taken out of hospice. And I would submit to you that that's our work. We are charged with preventing the preventable suffering of the cancer and birth defects associated with our wayward industrial agriculture. We are charged with getting Iowa out of hospice ecology. William Stafford wrote an extraordinary poem called Ask Me. Sometime when the river is ice, ask me mistakes I have made. Ask me whether what I have done is my life. And it goes on to describe standing by the silent river and waiting. We know the current is there hidden, and there are comings and goings from miles away that hold the stillness exactly before us. What the river says, that is what I say. And what I offer you tonight is that I think that the river speaks for health, that the water, the rivers that are defined in our Constitution, the boundaries of our state, call for health, call for clean water, for the frogs, for the fish, for all of humanity, and that we can change that from an index of suffering to an index of joy. What the river says, I say. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that excellent and very eloquent those thoughts. A wonderful barometer of where we are, and very, very sobering, but very true. We are also very pleased to have Dr. Sandra Steingraber here with us tonight, and she is a biologist, cancer survivor, and author of a book that many of you may be familiar with, Living Downstream. And so I will turn it over to you, Dr. Steingraber. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, hi, everyone, and what a great honor to follow Carolyn. I am also a senior scientist at the Science and Environmental Health Network, so I work under Carolyn's amazing leadership, and I believe my boss just told you all that you are doing heroic work, and I would second that. I'm going to start off very personally and then do a little science and history with you and then close on a personal note again. So personally, I am saying hello to you from the Hudson Valley of New York. I live in the village of Hudson on the east bank of the river. And this village began as a whaling town, even though we are 120 miles away from the mouth of the ocean. The Native Americans refer to the Hudson as the river that flows in both directions. It's a tidal river. So I always know when the tide's coming in. I can just walk down a couple blocks to the bank and know what the ocean is doing, even though I'm far from it, because you can see the current reverses course. And this was started a long time ago in the early 18th century by whalers who were out in Nantucket and kept being shelled by the British, and they were having trouble building their ships and doing what they needed to do. So they moved their whole operations up the Hudson River in this safe place because it was a little bit upstream from the military installation that you might have heard of called West Point. So when I walk down to the river to see what the tide is doing, I can see the old rendering plant where whale carcasses were turned into whale oil, and that was what our economy depended on, right? The lights were turned on by whale oil. And I like to go down there and look at that because it reminds me that things do change. That at the time that Hudson was founded, it seemed inevitable, right? A whole town was founded around turning whales into fuel. And that was considered how things were just done. But we don't know anything about whale oil anymore. And so now we're in this world of synthetic fertilizer and natural gas, which is the progenitor of synthetic fertilizer. And it seems like it will go on forever, but change is possible. And that's what I think about when I walk down to the Hudson, is change. But I didn't grow up here. I actually grew up in Central Illinois. And so I was very happy to hear everyone who knows how to say R in their sentences because nobody out here knows how to do that. So it's nice to hear Midwestern voices again. I have an aunt who lives in Iowa, and my family's farm is a corn and soybean farm. And I actually came out of an orphanage called the Baby Fold, which had its origins as part of the movement. I'm going to mention it because it connects our two states. A part of a movement in the 19th century called the Orphan Train, which rounded up street kids in Philadelphia and New York, renamed them orphans so they could get lots of funding from people like the Astors, and then put them on trains and sent them out to Midwestern farms. And they were quote unquote adopted, but really used for farm labor. And so this happened to a 250,000 kids. Now we call it child trafficking, but that's not what we called it then. It was just seen as a normal thing to do, right? As part of the Christianization of Jewish kids and all kinds of things that are horrifying to us now. Now, by the time I was born in 1959, there was no more orphan train. People became horrified by what it really was doing and the kind of abuse that children faced with it. So it stopped, and then the orphanage I came out of began sourcing babies from local unmarried women, right? And so it was the progenitor for the modern adoption movement. I mention it because the whistle stop on the orphan train where my orphanage is from, the Baby Fold in Normal, Illinois, is the stop right before the one in Iowa. So there were a lot of babies and kids taken to Iowa after the ones were selected by the farm families in Illinois. So that connects us too. So that's another thing that changed, right? That we used to think that was okay and normal, just the way we did things, but we don't do that anymore. That would be considered, again, child trafficking, and we have a language for that now that we didn't before. So farming has also changed, both in Illinois and Iowa. When my adoptive grandparents ran the farm, it was in the 30s. They managed to get through the whole Great Depression with this very diversified farm that had chickens and hogs and Holsteins, and also hay, oats, corn, alfalfa. They grew wine grapes. They had an orchard and so forth. And then after World War II, in central Illinois, as in Iowa, it became a kind of cog in the corn and soy factory farming machine. Iowa has more CAFOs than we do, but we have a few of them. And then, of course, ethanol took off. And now 4 of every 10 cornfields you see are used to grow corn that's turned into ethanol. So essentially, we're feeding traffic. We're no longer feeding ourselves. And ethanol is a very nitrogen-greedy crop. And so anhydrous ammonia, which comes from natural gas, is used to fertilize that. And thus does agriculture in Illinois and Iowa ride a tandem bicycle with the fossil fuel industry. But also, and what brings us here tonight, is that nitrates don't stay in the fields where the corn is grown, but they run into surface and groundwater and become part of our bodies and all the suffering that Carolyn referred to. So now I want to do, just for a few minutes, if you'll hang with me, a little chemistry. And I have written about this, so I'm going to put the links to what I've written in the chat after I'm done here, so you don't need to take notes. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, so just kind of float along with me. I want to talk to you about nitrogen, which occupies box 7 in the periodic chart of elements. And I want to say first that we all desperately need nitrogen to stay alive. Nitrogen atoms are core components of our DNA and RNA, and they're key ingredients of amino acids, which makes up protein. So those are our muscles and our bones, and they're needed for the synthesis of ATP, which you might remember from the Krebs cycle in 7th grade, right? Which provide us all the calories to run everything. So nitrogen actually also comprises about 80% of the air that we breathe. However, we can't use it in that form because nitrogen atoms bind to each other with a really tight triple bond and they won't separate. And we have the inability to pull the nitrogen out of the air to use it for all the things I just mentioned. Now, of course, 20%, so 80% of the air is nitrogen, 20% is oxygen. And that's, of course, in the chemical chart, nitrogen's next door neighbor. It inhabits box number 8 in the periodic chart. And of course, it's snatched up immediately by our hemoglobin and our red blood cells, and it drives everything, including our Krebs cycle. But we can't use any of the nitrogen. We inhale it, it's exhaled right back out again. And so it has to be fixed with oxygen before we can use it. And the way that works is that plants also can't snatch nitrogen out of the air. So they have fancy ways of getting it. Out in the ocean, photosynthetic plankton, which are just floating around on the surface of the sea, they actually rely on upwellings to bring them nitrogen-rich fish poop. So even plankton rely on manure to grow, even though they don't have roots. Otherwise, by gravity, that would fall to the seafloor, but the ocean upwellings bring it to them, and that fish poop is kind of the miracle grow for plankton. Here on land, and I'm sure this is not news to anybody who lives in ag country, plants source nitrogen from the soil where its atoms are bonded to oxygen, and that's called nitrates, or hydrogen, and that's called ammonium. And we can use nitrates, plants can use nitrates and ammonium to do what they need to do. It can break them apart, it can manipulate these molecules and run its little plant bodies based on that. So on land as out on sea, animal poop, manure, is a key part of the nitrogen cycle. And without cows or hogs on the land, that comes from fungi, worms, and all kinds of other decomposers. They plop out their waste into the soil as ammonia, and then soil bacteria convert the ammonium to nitrates, and that's what plant roots can easily assimilate. I'm going through this chemistry lesson super fast, but again, I'll put this in the chat. Now, there are some plants like soybeans that are legumes that have the ability to construct little housing projects on their roots to quarter nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and those bacteria then possess enzymes that can actually pull nitrogen in the air apart, which we can't do, and then they offer them free electrons and coax the nitrogen atoms into binding with hydrogen and thus making ammonia. And that's how soybeans can get their own nitrogen and also add nitrogen into the soil. Okay, that's the end of the chemistry lesson. Now, quickly, a little history. During World War II, the nation state of Germany had a big problem. And one of them was we didn't have any synthetic fertilizer yet. And when the Allies blockaded South America, it cut off Germany's access to sodium nitrate, also tellingly at the time was called white gold. So these natural deposits of pure sodium nitrate were mined from this desert in northern Chile, and they provided about 80% of the nitrogen that was used for making fertilizers around the world at the time. So this Chilean saltpeter had replaced already guano deposits, which is basically bat manure, which was mined out of Peruvian caves. But in any case, the Germans had access to none of this because the Allies blockaded all of it. So that created a fertilizer shortage for German farmers, but also a munitions problem also, because sodium nitrate is not just used to grow crops, it's also a key ingredient in gunpowder. And as you might know, nitrogen both feeds people and can blow them up, which is how you can take a bunch of fertilizer and blow up the Oklahoma Federal Building, right? That happened in 1995. So these two German chemists went to work. Their names were Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch, and they figured out a way to get nitrogen atoms out of the air, break their triple bonds, forsake each other, and conjugate with hydrogen and make ammonia. And that's called the Haber-Bosch process. Again, it goes all the way back to World War I, and it uses immense pressure and brutally high temperatures to convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia, and it has to react it with a hydrogen. And the hydrogen comes from natural gas. So all the hydrogens are pulled off a molecule of natural gas. So that's the starting point. Now, we still do that. So that's one thing that hasn't changed at all. This Haber-Bosch process, which got started out of a wartime necessity for the Germans to both farm and have gunpowder and blow stuff up, that process, more than 100 years later, is still how we make anhydrous ammonia fertilizer. That's what you're drinking when that nitrogen gets into your body. So to put a finer point on it, almost all commercial nitrogen fertilizers currently on the market are created using natural gas, which is fracked out of the earth, as the hydrogen feedstock. And it can be stolen from farms and fertilizer warehouses because, as you know, ammonia is also a key ingredient in the illicit manufacture of methamphetamine. And as a water pollutant, liquid ammonia fertilizers freely run into rivers and streams and can fall as a kind of falling curtain of chemicals into groundwater, with 1 in 10 Iowans drinking private water from wells. There's no kind of water treatment for those 10% of Iowans. And you know that the ammonia fertilizer runoff is carried down the Mississippi. It's a major contributor to the Gulf of Mexico's dead zones, where there are all these decomposing algal blooms that deplete oxygen. Okay, so again, I want to remind us all that we are all 65% water by weight. Whatever is in the world's water, whatever is in the water table where you live, is 65% of you. And you can drink all the bottled water that you want, but a 10-minute shower is the exposure equivalent of drinking a half gallon of tap water. So to review the health effects again, nitrates are linked definitively to bladder and colon cancer, also thyroid and ovarian cancer. And in pregnancy, they interfere with oxygen uptake. You've probably heard of blue baby syndrome. So a baby is fed on formula that has nitrates in it from the water that's made to dilute the formula. That interferes with oxygen transport in the baby and they turn blue. That's a visible thing, but more recently, as you heard, there's research showing that premature birth is also a consequence of drinking high nitrates in drinking water. Premature birth is the #1 cause of disabilities in the United States, and certain kinds of birth defects, and especially neural tube birth defects. So the neural cord that is the notochord that's the beginning of the spinal column doesn't form correctly. So I said I'd end on a personal note. I myself was diagnosed with bladder cancer at the age of 20, and then I went on to have colon cancer in my 30s. I have just had what I hope is the very last cystoscope of my life. I'm now about to turn 66. So I have dealt with cancer for 46 years. I was diagnosed pretty much exactly on my 20th birthday. And there are chemicals, including nitrates, including pesticides, and a few other things, some industrial solvents in my hometown's drinking water well. I'm giving away the plot of my book, Living Downstream, and the film that it's based on. And so I go back to my hometown and kind of uncover the cancer cluster that was covered up, the drinking water contamination, which few people knew about, And I realized that even though I'm an adopted person, that the reason that my adoptive aunt died of the same kind of bladder cancer I had, my cousin, who's exactly my age, had a much more aggressive form of colon cancer as a young woman than I did, that these things are not explainable by hereditary. Like, I come from a cancer family, but I'm not related to my family by chromosome. So I need to look elsewhere for that explanation, right? So that personal experience led me to the work that I do. And I want to say that behind every data point, there's a human life, and I'm one of those lives. I won't know with certainty whether it was the nitrates or the solvents or something else in my environment that caused me to have cancer. But I can say that just this year, the genetic test was available, finally, for people who don't have a family pedigree, to find out if I have inherited a genetic syndrome that would explain why I had these early onset bladder and colon cancers. I only found out just last month I do not, in fact, have this inherited mutation. So the explanation for my health story lies in the environment, almost certainly. So I just joined with you in preventing suffering in Iowa, knowing that you have a terrible problem, some of the worst nitrogen pollution in water that we've ever seen, and the highest cancer rates, highest new rates of cancer. And so those two terrible truths together, I hope, will lead to change, the kind of change, like we don't take fat out of whale brains anymore to turn on the lights. We don't grab kids off the streets and turn them into farm laborers. So this whole system has to also change, and sometimes the upside of a huge problem that has multiple issues in it. There's ethanol, there's factory farming, there's fracking, and the need for the fossil fuel industry to have a market and for stuff like anhydrous ammonia. Sometimes when there's this enormous problem, that also means that there are many points of entry. So you can find one piece of this story that you feel like you can handle, that you have special knowledge about, or that you have a story to tell about it, and make that your specialty, and then work together with all your fellow Iowans. And I feel certain that change can happen. And I stand with you. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for that, Sandra. I definitely learned some things from your talk. And if you would be so generous, and Carolyn as well, we do have, if folks look at the bottom of your screen, there is a little Q&A box. And so people who are participating, you do have the ability to type in a question, and I can give those questions to Sandra if anyone has a question for her or Carolyn Raffensperger. And apologies for misspelling your name, Carolyn. But I will start just to give folks some time to ask a question. I know a lot of people are concerned here in Iowa because they have children or grandchildren who they thought this would be a good place for kids to grow up. And I wonder if you would have any advice that you would offer to folks about that.
Well, I guess I can start. I think we stay where we are and we fight. We protect what we love. I think that's actually the official motto. I think I learned that from Food and Water Watch. I think I have a T-shirt with Food and Water Watch, and it says "Protect what you love." So, if Iowa is the place that you love, then you fight for it. I mean, there's no running away from this.
You know, we're going to have to get creative. And we have not had opportunities to come together and think beyond some of the regulations. We need regulations. We need good laws. And in the absence of those, what are we going to do? So, let's look at the insurance. let's give farmers who are doing the right thing, better premiums on their insurance. Let's try some other things that are not just, oh, these farmers do the right thing. We need to look at some financial mechanisms, economic mechanisms, and we need to use the kinds of tools that we can invent. An index of suffering, a big thermometer that lists the cancer rate and the trends on billboards. Things like that that are associated with the water. That we make the case in new ways where we say your suffering is preventable. For a parent to think that their child's cancer is preventable is an extraordinary idea. My father was surgeon in chief at Children's Memorial in Chicago. He was one of the founders of pediatric surgery. He was the first doctor to hold that title. And one day when I was a child, he came home and said that he thought that some of the cancers and birth defects that he was the world's expert on were actually caused by pollution, that they were environmentally linked. And that was shocking to me. And I asked him why he didn't do something. And he said he couldn't prove it. But we know enough to act. We have enough knowledge about some of this to take precautionary action. And I think about why not, let's hold a bioethics conference and bring in bioethicists and epidemiologists. That this is a failure of human rights. This is an absolute denial of human rights of our children. We are going to have to try some new things. And I am ready and prepared to think with you about what those might be. Food and Water Watch is a remarkable organization. I work very closely with Jim Walsh from Food and Water Watch in Washington, D.C. And I know that one of the things that we can do together is bring together, all of our skill and talents, whether it's art, whether it's science, whether it's the policy people. We changed the debate on CO2 pipelines. We are changing the debate by not letting go of the issue of pollution in water. Kim Reynolds isn't going to be in office long. And we owe it to future generations to make sure that the candidates that are running for governor, who are running for election in the next cycle, that we hold them accountable for meaningful solutions to the water, that they commit to doing something that will change the terms of the debate. So all I can say is let's be bulldogs, and we're going to shake that bone until we're not letting go. We are not letting go of that. And I call us to new ideas, new thinking. What are you dreaming? What's your idea about bringing this to the attention of your city council or your county board? Where are the points of entry? How can we intervene in the system?
Thank you. That's good points. And we have a few questions in the Q&A. Someone is asking about Republican arguments that fertilizer is very expensive. And we're told here in Iowa that because of that, farmers don't want to put more on than they might need. They're not actually over fertilizing. And then that there are fines for over fertilizing. Do either of you want to address that, or?
So, farming is complicated. My husband and I farmed in North Dakota. Some of you may know Fred Kirshenman, my husband, who was the director of the Leopold Center and then the Distinguished Fellow there. And so farming is complicated. And some of it has to do with timing. If you've got a complicated weather patterns, and you've got a lot going on. You don't know what's going to happen next. And so you apply fertilizer in the fall rather than in the spring. You're going to have it run off in the spring. If if we have a drought and it's just sitting there, all of a sudden, kind of rain that we've had in Ames, where I live, we've had over 10 inches of rain in July. And last night we had a prediction of 4 inches coming in tonight, or I think it's reduced. But when you start flushing out what has been applied, then whatever measures you had taken before, it's in the water. But it's also that there's too much fertilizer. I mean, too much manure. And so if you've just got massive quantities of hog manure and no place to put it, you're going to overload the land. And so it's a set of twisted, complicated farming issues that are tied to economics, tied to timing, and some of that can be teased apart. Some of what we could do is not grow corn on corn. As soon as you start growing corn on corn, you get bigger problems. Introduce hay into the rotation, or oats. Then you reduce the kind of runoff that we're seeing. So there are solutions, but then you start looking at, there aren't enough markets for oats, or if you've changed gotten rid of some of the processing for some of these grains, and it's a lot harder. So it's an entire system that deserves careful attention, and it deserves rethinking. So we have subsidized corn and subsidized ethanol in such a way that we're going to overload the system with the fact that corn is now essentially a welfare queen, sucking up nitrogen, needs a lot of it. And we have a very brittle weather system. So when you get the combination of all of that, you've got a recipe for disaster. I want to speak to what's going on in Des Moines. The problem is they are taking the nitrates out of the water, and the equipment can only take out so much at a time. So, the water comes into the water treatment plant, they're taking out the nitrates, and they can only take out so much. And if you're using so much water to water your lawn, to fill your swimming pool, to do whatever else, water the golf course, then the water treatment plant can't keep up with the nitrate removal. And so what they were trying to do is just slow down the water use so that they could take the nitrates out so that you had something to drink. And so, yeah, they started letting you water new sod, but at one point they were taking the nitrates out of the water in Des Moines and then dumping them back in downstream. So the whole system is just distressing. And, we're not taking out a lot of, not taking out all the nitrates in the system. A whole lot of those are being flushed down the river. And as Sandra said, into the Mississippi, because we've tiled all of these fields to accelerate water. So one of the things that we've done with our system is to accelerate the flow of water in many ways. So, less ice. Ice is one thing that slows water down. But when we have warm winters, then the water is just rushing downstream. It's eroding off the fields, carrying the fall applied nitrates, and it goes on and on and on. So what we have to do is take that entire system and take care. We need to rethink it, introduce new crops in a crop rotation. We need to not apply manure in the fall, etc.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Michaelan. We have probably some questions in the Q&A that we're going to have to, we'll try to get you a typed answer just for the sake of time. And we want to make sure we are able to finish our program. So Michaelan, I'll pass it to you, and thank you very much to our speakers. So.
Yeah, echoing what Jennifer said, I want to thank both of our guest speakers for bringing personal stories and poetry into this conversation. We know, like they mentioned, statistics don't tell the whole story, and they are terrifying. Iowa in 2024, there were over 21,000 new incidents of cancer diagnosed, and some 6,000 Iowans died of cancer last year. But it is stories and cultural works that make these statistics meaningful and call us to action in a powerful way. And next, I want to introduce one of our great allies, Dr. Adam Shriver from the Harkin Institute. He joined the Harkin Institute in 2021, working on a Kellogg Foundation grant to create a good food plan for the state of Iowa as part of what would eventually become the Iowa Food System Coalition. He took on the role of Director of the Wellness and Nutrition Policy at the Harkin Institute in 2022, which includes organizing the annual Harkin on Wellness Symposium. He previously worked as a postdoctoral research fellow in medical ethics and health policy at the University of Pennsylvania and has many other accreditations to his name. So with that, I will welcome Dr. Adam Shriver.
Well, thank you, Michaelan, and I'm really honored to be included on a panel or included on a call with such great scientists. And I also just wanted to say that I am just a huge believer in the model of change of Food and Water Watch. I think that, ultimately it's grassroots action that is responsible for almost all of the positive changes in the world. I was also at CCI's 50th year anniversary event last year, and they're another organization where the grassroots is front and center. So I just want to say I really appreciate what you all are doing. So I'm joining you from a car in California at the moment. I am at a conference with Senator Tom Harkin. And during Senator Harkin's remarks today at this conference, he mentioned Iowa being the #2 state in cancer and being the only state with rising cancer rates. And so, it's fascinating to see how Iowa is quickly gaining this reputation around the country for very unfortunate reasons. But it's definitely something that needs to be talked about, and I'm really glad that you guys are doing this. I'll also just mention that the Harkin Institute has been partnering with Iowa Environmental Council on cancer listening sessions around the state of Iowa. And so we have them in 15 different communities over the course of the summer. And, I wanted to mention that just because Dr. Steingraber's comments are just so familiar to me, because we keep encountering people who have very similar stories just all around the state, where there are these big clusters of cancer, with people who are not genetically related at all. And so it's just, I agree with the assessment that we're facing a clean water crisis at the moment. I wanted to jump in on the sort of main reason I was invited to talk here was about this CISRA report. And so just to provide a little bit of context for this report. So CISRA stands for Central Iowa Source Water Resource Allocation Plan. And basically what happened is about 2 years ago, John Norris, who was the previous administrator for Polk County, decided that he wanted to conduct a study looking at all of the issues facing water in central Iowa. And so he pulled together, he worked with a woman named Jennifer Terry, who's the project lead, and they pulled together this team of 16 scientists to look at all of these different possible issues, nitrates being one of the prominent ones, but not the only one. And they only told them, we just want to know what the facts are. We don't have a political agenda. We're not asking you to, you know, say that one person's right or one person's wrong. Just tell us what the facts are about water. And so this report really was an incredible accomplishment. So I think they spent like $1 million on putting it together. There was 4,400 hours of work by this team of scientists. They put together this report that's a 248-page report. I'll post a link to it in the comments after I'm done talking. And the report is just really excellent and well done. I think the members of Food and Water Watch would really like it. It not only talks about the science of issues like nitrates, but also things like E. coli and many of the other problems that dumping huge amounts of animal manure in the waterways can cause. But it also provides a really nice background of, tells the history of what Iowa's waterways looked like, pre um, white settlers coming here, and the changes that have happened to the river over the course of, these hundreds of years of agricultural development. So it just really tells the story very nicely about what everything is happening now. It has great use of graphics and visuals to convey this message. But it does have some findings that will not be at all surprising to folks on this call. Many of the things were things that have already been mentioned on this call. But just to kind of note a few things, just like Adam mentioned earlier, one of the big findings of the report was that 80% of the nitrates in Des Moines or central Iowa's waterways are as a result of agriculture. And of course, a lot of that is from synthetic fertilizers, but also, especially in Iowa, the leading state for CAFOs, it's a lot of it is coming from over application of manure because we have so much hog poop, we don't know what to do with it. And so the easy solution for that is just to keep putting it on fields that are close by. The report also had some recommendations like that, in order to fix this problem, it's not enough to just focus on the river itself. You can't just look at the river and try to solve this problem. You have to look at the land management practices. And so they recommended things like improved manure management, having clear benchmarks for progress, having better monitoring systems in place. As I'm sure people on this call know, some of the monitoring has been defunded by the state recently. More transparent data collection and analysis practices, and then having these sort of comprehensive watershed plans in place. And so, because it had those recommendations, there was a change in leadership at the county. And from what everyone was hearing, even though $1 million had been spent on this report, there were some people and groups that were advocating for the report to not be released at all. There were people who wanted it to just be shelved and put away and not released. And there was also initially there was going to be this big public presentation of the report where all the scientists got together and presented their results. And, there was a big sort of public event organized around it. And so I think maybe a compromise between this, like, let's not release it at all and let's have a big public presentation. The Board of Supervisors for Polk County was going to just basically sort of release the report into the record, but not really have a big public presentation about it. And so a group of concerned citizens in Polk County loaded up the Board of Supervisors meeting where they were releasing this report, and had a lot of comments about just how valuable the report is and how important it is to have the scientific base of information from which to make important policy decisions about. And at that meeting, I also attended and I said that the Harkin Institute at Drake University would be happy, since the county wasn't presenting the results, we would be happy to host a meeting where we invited the scientists to present the results of this report to the public. And so, that actually worked, and the county went along with it. And so we are now going to be holding a forum on August 4th at 6 p.m. At Drake University. That is four of the scientists from this report are going to be presenting the results, and talking about what they found. The report is focused on a lot of different areas. So drinking water is, of course, one big area, but it also talks about recreation. So Iowa, of course, is home to, you guys all hear about the beach closures happening regularly in Iowa because of our water quality problems. It also talks about fishing, which you might think would be lumped into recreation, but actually it turns out there are certain populations in the Des Moines area that actually rely on fishing for sustenance. And so the huge pollutant implications for fish have very serious health impacts disproportionately on certain populations in the Des Moines region and the Polk County region. It also talks about the effects on the environment more generally. And so another thing that's kind of a regular occurrence in Iowa, unfortunately, is these big fish kills that happen every once in a while because of some spillage or some accident where hundreds of fish are killed all at, this one sort of catastrophic environmental event. So they're going to be presenting at Drake University on August 4th. Um, the event so far has seemed to attract just a huge amount of interest and attention. So as of this morning, we had 593 people registered in person for this event and 145 people registered to watch it online, which I think is just a testament to just how much people really do care about the issues that everyone on this call is working on. And that, the crisis in Iowa has reached a point where people know that something needs to be done about it, and they're just looking for opportunities to do something. So we're going to have this event. We also, John Wanamaker from Iowa Public Radio is now going to be the moderator for the event. So I think it's going to be a great, a really nicely done event. I would encourage everyone from Food and Water Watch, if you're if you're close to the Polk County area, show up for this. It's going to be a really big, hopefully, kind of rowdy event of people who care a lot about water. If you're not in the Polk County region, we are going to have virtual options as well. So I'm going to post the link to where you can register there. And just in general, I mean, I think the point of this event is just if we have an event and hundreds of people show up wanting to know about water in Iowa, I believe that will send a strong message to policymakers that this is something that they can't just keep ignoring. They can't just keep saying, oh, yeah, well, we're already doing some things and we think that they're working. It would send a strong message that a change of course is needed. I also want to just mention that, we're looking into ways of having this event build into future activity, not just have a one-time event, but think about how this can translate into more things happening in the future. And so I'm hoping that I can work with Food and Water Watch and some other groups in the area to think about, how we can harness some of the energy for this to translate into, bolstering the incredible work that you guys are already doing. So, yeah, so I think I will stop there. I guess the only other thing I would mention is at the Harkin Institute, we also, we are now focusing on the connection between agriculture and public health as one of our kind of core issues. And we just started a new podcast about that issue called Canary in a Cornfield, based on the play on words of canary in a coal mine. And we have an episode there that is that's kind of a preview of this August 4th event. So I'll post a link to that as well. And so you can kind of get a sense of what some of the things that the scientists are going to be talking about. But yeah, just in general, this event on August 4th hopefully is going to be a really big community event. We've got this incredible bulletproof report by 16 scientists to use as a base of information. And I'm excited to see how that can help move things forward along with the great work happening in Iowa from groups like Food and Water Watch. So thank you so much for letting me speak.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And I did drop in the chat the event registration for next Monday, August 4th, where you can come and learn about this new report that was published in Polk County, and also a link to find the podcast, Canary in a Cornfield. There was just one question I wanted to run past you while we have time. The question was, I recently rode in Ragbri, and I could smell hog manure along the road where the greater ditches had water in them, but no CAFOs were in sight. What would cause this?
Oh, so this is a question from the chat?
Yes.
Oh, so sorry, can you say it one more time, Michaela? I didn't
Yeah,
catch.
definitely. No worries. The question was from someone who participated in Ragbri, and he was explaining that he could smell hog manure along the road where ditches had water in them, but no CAFOs were in sight. And he was wondering if you know what would cause this.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to jump to conclusions without knowing more. I mean, I think um, there's a lot of, findings that I think are potentially relevant to that, which is just how easy it is for when manure is over applied. And we've got these really fancy tile drainage systems now that wash water away really quickly. But because of that, that also allows a lot of the pollutants like nitrates and the other smelly parts of pig manure to wash away as well. Another thing, we had a conference last September where we talked about air pollution from CAFOs, and it is kind of shocking how far some of the health risks from CAFOs can travel in the air, and so that's another, potential threat to Iowans is just how far that can drift, and I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up in Iowa, some people would sort of say, "Oh, that's the smell of money, don't worry about the hog manure smell." It turns out that our noses are kind of correct, right? Like when we're smelling these awful smells, there actually is a health risk associated with that. And there's actually a scientist in Iowa who he thinks that the Iowa's cancer rates are more tied to air pollution than they are to the water pollution. I don't know enough to sort of take a strong stand on that, but yeah, I guess I would just say that unfortunately there's too many possible explanations for what might be going on there.
Thank you so much for that context and also for joining us tonight. Evelyn, you can go ahead and put the slides back up. I think Dr. Shriver ended on a really powerful note with everything he was talking about leading up to this forum that he's putting on next Monday and having hundreds of people registered to attend and having thousands of people across the state of Iowa ready to take action and wanting to end the consequences and impacts of corporate agriculture, not only on our health, but also on our lived environment and on our waterways. So we're going to share a couple of opportunities to get involved with Food and Water Watch that we have coming up. So I'll go ahead and pass it to Jennifer to talk a little bit about what's happening in Iowa City.
So this coming Saturday, August 2nd, we are going to be at the Iowa City Farmers Market, and we are doing a joint tabling event with Stand Up for Science, which is a local organization of, I think it's mostly grad students and folks at the university who are very concerned right now about research funding and the cuts that the Trump administration is making to federal national science funding and money that's available for folks who study cancer, study environmental pollution. And so we'll be doing outreach about these issues with Food and Water Watch, and we would love to have volunteers if you are in the Iowa City area and looking to get involved. And there is a link that Michaela just dropped in the chat. You can sign up for Mobilize just like you did for this event, and we'd be happy to see you there on Saturday. And I'll pass it back to Michaela, who has an action in Des Moines.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Going out and talking to our neighbors and talking to folks where we live is incredibly important, especially here in Iowa, where the only messages that people are getting are oftentimes from corporate agribusiness, which is making a lot of profit from the way the system is currently set up, and also from politicians that are being corruptly influenced by corporate ag profits. And, you know, it's changed over the past year, certainly, but every time we've gone out and talked to people, I've come across people who've never heard about the water crisis here in our state. And the more people who know about it, the more people who are going to be interested in taking collective action. And again, as I mentioned, this is not the first time that people living in the United States have been confronted with their environment and their homes being poisoned and polluted by corporations and by US industry. And back in 1970, it was the first Earth Day included 20 million people taking to the streets and demanding the regulation that we have today, including the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And this struggle also led to the creation of the EPA. It's really important to remember that politicians aren't responsible for these large-scale transformations that have ensured the safety of our environment and produced the standard of living that we have come to see as our right here in the United States. It was, change that was brought by everyday people demanding an end to the systems that were harming them and their families. So also in Des Moines, this coming Sunday, we have a direct action training, and we'll be doing this ahead of an action we have planned the following week. But this training will also include a lot of great information for anyone who's interested in planning or helping to lead actions, protests, demonstrations, and we hope all of you can join us. You can go to the next slide, Evelyn. We also know that there are many of you on this call who live far away from Des Moines and Iowa City, where Jennifer and I are based. And so this next forum are for folks who are interested in launching a clean water canvas in your community or leading a clean water forum where you live. And if you fill out this form, we'll be in touch and very motivated to find ways to support you and join you on the ground where you live. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close out this webinar. We'll be sure to collect all of the questions that everyone submitted and share a recording of tonight's call and as many answers as we can in a follow-up email. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.